I originally wanted to make this video before 1.1. Wuthering Waves' launch story was an accidental comedy, and no one was really talking about it. Problem is, I started working on it 5 days before 1.1's release, and I've never edited anything before or made any kind of content, so after working on it for 26 hours straight, it was just bad, so I scrapped it. I was gonna move on with my life, but then 1.1's story gave me a lot to talk about. And I'm recording this 5 days before 1.2 comes out, so nothing's changed. I'm still a fool. 1.1 was a really big step up. It's important to contextualize what it still does wrong with all of the things it does better than launch. Girl Game seems to be capable of writing good stories, they just need a bit of guidance. The blind praise 1.1 is getting helps no one. And just to be clear, I'm only talking about the main story here. The world quests and general side quests have their own set of problems, and I haven't played the character quests because the main story makes me not want to read the words the game puts in front of my eyes. 1.0's story sucked. Acts 1 through 5 sucked. Scar included. We'll get to that, just give me a second. Then Act 6 Turbo sucked. Again, just give me a second. Wuthering Waves' problems start at the very foundational level, with exposition. The game's approach to explaining the world it created is bad. Most of the time, the game will hand you a peer-reviewed study on whatever thing it wants to explain and tell you to figure it out. And whenever the game does this, my brain will just kinda... I've heard the cope take that the problem is just people's attention spans. But that's wrong. First of all, my main gotcha is Fate Go. I am happy to sit down and read a novel if it's good. Which this isn't. Exposition needs to be digestible. If you want an example of good exposition, look at the end of Act 7. The final cutscene was basically just Jue explaining things about the world and the rover, but it doesn't trigger the instinctual urge to mash buttons until it's over, because the information is contextualized. You're not reading Marcy from accounting's dissertation, you're seeing a conversation, a character's explaining something with their own words. That being said, Act 7 still makes the same mistakes as the early story. Look at this. Even though Chang Li gives you a TLDR, this wall of text makes the reader tune out and makes you feel like you missed something for skipping it. This makes it really clear that it's not that Kuro Games saw the problem and fixed it, it's just that the story naturally needs less exposition now. There are many more examples of 1.1 failing at lore dumps. They know how to write important lore dumps that are these big moments, but not the laundry that is smaller details. And that's a skill that they need to develop. Going to a new country is going to be a boring encyclopedia of hell. Another branch of exposition, and another thing the game does wrong, is its approach to writing locations. On top of being an excuse to poorly explain the world, the early story's treasure hunt, what most of launch was spent on, was an excuse to get you to care for and learn about the city of Jinzhou. To teach you about the deep and vast culture of the city, you go to a military base in the outskirts and learn that the city can't import mangosteens right now because of a war against TDs, the setting's monsters. You also read a research paper on trials for a cure for an epidemic the city faced over 20 years ago. This doesn't go anywhere. They just hand you an annotated essay. Usually, when developing a city, the emphasis should be on its people. What the game is doing here is reading off of the Jinzhou Wikipedia page when it should be focusing on the smaller stuff. To really drive home what the game does wrong here, I think it's best to use an example of city writing done right. So I'm gonna bring Fate Grand Order to the stage. Specifically, its 7th arc, or 8th, or 9th depending on how you count it. I'm using Babylonia, numbers are hard. Now, just to be clear, I'm not holding Wuthering Waves' story to Fate Go's standards. No, Fate Go's story is incredible, going far beyond anything I've seen in gacha. In any game, really. I just think WuWa can take cues from it. Both stories have to start developing their setting basically from scratch, and they go about it in a very similar way, by giving the main character chores to do as an excuse to have them learn about the city and the story's cast before diving into the meat of it. Wuthering Waves has Jin Si send you on a treasure hunt to learn about the import status of mangosteens. Riveting, I know, but there's room to improve. In place of a preschool time waster, Babylonia sees Ritsuka and Mash, the game's protagonists, going around doing odd jobs helping the people of Uruk, the city they're in, to earn King Gilgamesh's respect. The key difference here is that Babylonia puts the emphasis on the people of Uruk, the foods they eat, their jobs, how they live their lives, even a quick trip to the military to see how they train. One of the reasons I brought up Babylonia is how incredibly similar its premise is to WuWa's 1.0 story. Both initially follow a city stuck in a never-ending war against an unending stream of monsters, with a story that's really just setting up for the climax. A sudden shift where everyone comes out of the woodwork to battle a revived evil of humanity the city has a history with. I bring this up because both stories need to set up similar things with their militaries and cities. I meant it when I said the game is showing you Jinzo's Wikipedia page. It's trying to rush through and show you the stuff the writing team had on their design doc and forgets the human element. The story of the epidemic from 20 years ago could have been interesting, but none of the cast is old enough to remember it. It doesn't affect the modern Jinzo, the thing the game is trying to get you to care about, or the characters you meet, or the plot. At the end of the day, it's just a fun fact. WuWa misses the forest for the trees. It needs to spend more time on small interactions actually developing the city. On that note, if they try to fix this, which they should, they need to be careful not to go too far the other way. This is still a problem. Hongzen, 1.1 city, takes the audience caring about it for granted. The place is in the middle of a crisis, everyone's evacuated into this cave, but we barely talk to the people. Instead, this lady worries for Jinxi and points you in the direction of the plot every so often. The game is more concerned with developing the Savante court than the people who live in the land the story is set in. We get the Wikipedia cliff notes again. We know some stuff about their forefathers, but we barely touch on the people of today. Speaking of people, Scar. I'll talk more in depth on characters as a whole in a bit, but I should address him now, as he's something fans of the story defend as one of the good points of Launch's story. I will admit that he's far better than the rest of Launch, but that's not a high bar. When you're talking about a story, you're actually talking about two things: the story itself and the storytelling, the way the story is being told. A 5 out of 10 story might be saved by 10 out of 10 presentation. That doesn't mean the story is actually better, the end product just is good in spite of its flaws. Wuthering Waves starts off with a 4 out of 10 story and 2 out of 10 presentation. The characters might be well animated, but it's all so bland. Then this edgelord, who probably cosplays Itachi on the weekends, comes in and he oozes personality. It's a breath of fresh air, but I don't think he's good. The storytelling of this segment rockets up to an 8 out of 10. Scar's dialogue doesn't feel like it's trying to emulate the energy of a bank teller an hour before getting off work, and the game is experimenting with its visuals and how it tells its story. But the story itself actually hasn't gotten better. It's still 4 out of 10. If you look past the extravagant facade, everything Scar says is just basic observations on why society sucks any 14-year-old who's watched Joker would point out and feel deep over. His whole logos is, what if the good guys are the bad guys? And when you ask him about why he's doing what he's doing, why you should believe him, or what his core beliefs are, he just says, "Nuh-uh, I'm not telling." For an anarchistic wildcard to be interesting, you need to have hints at a greater depth to his character. I've heard there's hints to this in a side mode, but I can't judge a story based on optional limited time content you could be locked out of forever. In the main story, Scar doesn't have anything that really makes me think he has motivations yet, or anything beyond being edgy, and the rest of the story hasn't been consistent enough to earn Kuro the privilege of trusting that they have something cooking. I could be proven wrong later with Scar, but his introduction was all style and less substance than the rest of the story. While I'm at it, I might as well really kick the hornet's nest. Act 6 was dog shit. It has an interesting beginning with Jian, but it's carried by empty hype. The story is barely there, it's more of a collection of tropes than anything. You've got the scientists who did bad research that got them killed, and the scene where a character arrives just in time to hear a dying soldier's words. They did that one twice. Listen, there's nothing wrong with using tropes. There isn't a single story that doesn't use at least a handful. They're basic building blocks. The problem with Wuthering Waves is that it doesn't do anything with them. It doesn't add any twists or turns, any unique spins to these tropes as old as time. It doesn't turn them into anything new. You've seen these moments done better 1,000 times. Outside of tropes, Act 6 is a bunch of flashy action scenes designed to distract you from how nothing the actual story is. A big hype moment like this can work, but only if what preceded it was good. Take the defense of Jinzo as an example. You've got this Avengers Assemble scene where everyone comes out of the woodwork to defend the city. Slight problem though. These guys are only technically characters, and I've literally never seen you two before. Who the fuck are you? I'm not being hyperbolic, these two literally aren't anywhere else in the story. If these were properly established characters and Jinzo were a city we cared about, this could be fine. But these characters all suck, and the game spent more time on mangosteens than the actual city. Let's turn to Babylonia again. Uruk is threatened many times, but each and every time there's a big fight to defend it, each and every character has a personal stake in the game, something they add to the confrontation. These range from Leonidas' unique relationship to Gorgon, a monster from the religion he worshipped who's now come to destroy the city he's defending, Anna, viewing Uruk as a sanctuary that accepts her in spite of her divinity, Anna's unique sense of responsibility over Gorgon since they're both manifestations of Medusa, Gilgamesh's responsibility to and views of his people, Quetzalcoatl and Merlin's different views on humanity and reasons for protecting them as immortal beings above them, among many others. Everyone has a reason for being in every fight they're in. Now look at the defense of Jinzo again. Half of these just aren't characters, they're basic personality traits with a motivation. They're just here because this is a gacha game and they're trying to show off their PNGs. It's a big flashy moment, but it's narrative empty calories. Now's as good a time as any to go over the game's character writing, or how it doesn't really have any. Early into the game, you meet this monk girl called Jianshin, who joins you for a bit. She's looking for some kid in the military, and throughout your short time together, you learn that she's good in combat, kind-hearted, and proactive in helping others, but not naive. Then she finds the kid and then she leaves. Yes! How exhilarating! Tell me more about how your favorite drink is water, and your favorite pastime is watching the grass grow. That's so nothing. You are a gacha game, for Christ's sake. You're supposed to entice me into rolling for these PNGs. I like her less now. There's just genuinely nothing going on here. Nothing to get attached to. She's just a generic good guy, and that's damn near every character. Hi, I'm Name. I'm a job. Here are my 1 or 2 personality traits. I'm gonna stand in this corner until the plot needs me. Does Guro think that's enough to get people to care? These guys need motivations and goals and a real reason to be in the story. There are, however, 2 standouts. Jian and Jinshi. They escape this sea of slop. Let's save Jinshi for last, as she's actually good. Jian at least had a promising start. If you'll remember, I mentioned Act 6 started with a really good character moment. You see, Jian is the leader of the military, and a long time ago, he was a part of this big battle as a regular soldier. This fight became a bloody mess, causing the general at the time to lose his prestige. Jian is now preparing his troops for a very similar fight to the one all those years ago, and as a part of some plot shenanigans, illusions of the past appear before Jian to ask him what he'll do, how he'll secure victory and avoid his predecessor's mistakes. That's really, really compelling. I sat there, curious as to where Jian's character would go, and then I sat there, and then the story ended, and Jian had basically done nothing. He joined in on punching the Dreamless, and then went home. I am not satisfied. You set up a character arc and did nothing with it. Jian defenders will tell you to play his character quest to get closure. So I did. And it's certainly better, it still has its problems, but it ends with Jian having to fight a demon made up of his dead soldier friends' tormented souls to symbolically finish grieving for them. That's a good direction to take his character, but it doesn't solve the problem. The main story promised something entirely different. Jian had to navigate a tough situation that he had personal trauma with. Seeing him have to deal with that would have been really interesting. But he effortlessly solved the problem without changing or reflecting or struggling or any of the things that make for an interesting character arc. The game promised me a pizza and handed me a hamburger. Both are meals, but I still want that pizza. But even if the character quest found a way to deliver on all of that setup, it still wouldn't solve the problem. The main story isn't a complete, satisfying package. If you want to fix a mistake, do it in the next act, not a side quest. Not everyone's gonna play a side quest. It's optional content, so you can't expect every player to see it. A main story needs to be a full package with side content elevating it. You can't hide the core of a character's arc in there. As long as Jian isn't satisfying in the main story, I can't call him a good character. Thankfully, Act 7 exists, and Jinshi is an actually good character. Her setup is actually delivered on, and her core, the character being developed, is really interesting. Specifically, her relationship with Jue, her patron god. I still have problems with her and Act 7 as a whole though. Again, there's a good core here, the problem is the rest. The main driving force behind Jinshi's actions in Act 7 are how important Jinzo and Hongzhen are to her, and her responsibility to protect them. Since the story just fails at properly establishing both places and getting you to care for them, it needs a scene where it develops what these places mean to her. If the game had succeeded in making you think these places are truly special earlier, I wouldn't have this problem. It could just rely on what the player already knows. Right now, I can only assume that she hates mangosteens since the only thing I know about this place is that there are no mangosteens. I understand that Jinshi is super dedicated to her job. I'm not upset at her actions, I think their reasoning and inherent motivations needed to be fleshed out more. Other than that, no complaints about her here. But Act 7 isn't off the hook yet. This chapter had more characters than just Jinshi, and I got beef with the redhead. Changli starts out alright. She's not as bad as anyone from launch, and actually has a personality, but she's nothing to write home about. The only real notable part of her character is that she shares a voice with my wife, Tamamo no Mae. You do some stuff, meet with Jinshi, and everything's fine until you get to this scene. I fucking hate this. But to really understand why this is bad, let's jump back in time a bit to Act 6. The setup for the climax is simple. As long as the Thornodians are around, there'll be an unending army of monsters to deal with, so the plan is for the fodder troops to hold the line while 4 elite soldiers rush in to kill the big bad. These are the Rover, Yang Yan, Jian, and the piece of drywall I mentioned earlier. Right as the offensive starts, Jianshin turns to the group and says, "Don't worry, I'll hold them off here." What the hell are you talking about? Actually, we are 5 feet into enemy lines. These are all fodder mobs. What are all the generic soldiers doing? And the literal next thing you do is jump onto a distant island. What the hell is this monk gonna do that the ocean can't? But the story moves on, and so do I. I didn't even like her anyways. The trio eventually arrives in front of this big statue, with the big bad being contained inside of a pocket dimension in its chest. And then Yang Yang turns to you and says, "Don't worry, I'll hold them off here." Huh? At the very least, these aren't garbage mobs. But why the hell can Yang Yang do more than the sheer cliff dropping straight into the fucking ocean, creating a giant gap between the building you're on that Yang Yang is defending and the statue's chest hole, 3 fucking miles away? And that's when it hit me. The story wanted Yang Yang and Jianshin here to create this illusion of everything coming full circle, but it couldn't be bothered to come up with anything for them to actually do, and didn't want them cluttering up Jian and the Rover's big fight. So after sitting on the sidelines twiddling their thumbs for a couple hours, they leave with this half-assed excuse. Because that's what this is, a non-committal excuse to get them out of the plot for the finale. Nothing would have changed if Jianshin didn't stay back to kill these goons before they could drown themselves. The story just wanted her out. And at that point, if she's not gonna do anything until you can come up with an excuse to send her home, why have her, or Yang Yang, here at all? We can jump back to Act 7 now, and this scene. The basic setup is that the Rover, Changli, and Jinshi come to pick up a plot trinket to do the plot. Changli turns to the others and says, "Alright, you guys gotta solve the rest of the plot. I only came here to show you guys the way." And for a second, I thought, oh, they're doing the same thing as Act 6, and it still needs work, but this is way better. Having Changli bow out because of personal beliefs is a character thing where she's acting to develop herself in a unique and interesting way. I would have rather this belief that she's not worthy of interfering with the plot be developed throughout the story instead of just dropped on us, and it still just needs work generally. I can still clearly tell that they just wanted her out of the plot, but it's a huge step up from, "Don't worry, I'll hold them off here." And then a fireball comes flying in as a small army of Fraxidus pour in, who haven't really done anything for the plot. Don't worry, I'll get to them. And then I realized that that was just the big titty lady saying, "Don't worry, I'll hold them off here," in cursive. And then the Rover and Jinshi ride an elevator out of the plot dungeon that seals the path behind them, so all the Fraxidus can't follow them anyways. You were so close. On the bright side, this was a tiny bit better. Changli got a cool fight, and she was an actual part of the plot before this. I still hate it, but it took a few baby steps. My problems with this all wrap around to what I said about the Avengers moment. If a character is leaving the plot for the foreseeable future, it needs to be for a real written reason. It needs to matter. Let's use Babylonia as an example again. Early on, there's a battle where the crew splits into two teams. Benkei, Ushiwakamaru, and a few others run a diversion while everyone else runs to the city of Nippur to do the big boy plot. Babylonia leans into the actual warfare and planning of fighting an endless army of demons, so running a diversion actually matters, and is necessary for the story to function. You know, unlike fighting an army of goons that don't influence the story before or after this moment. Ushi and Benkei leaving the plot also matters because Nippur was bait for an ambush, and not having everyone there to fight kinda sucked for the group. And once they realize something's up, Benkei stays behind to, now say it with me class, hold them off here while Ushi runs over to help the group escape Gorgon. There's a small problem though. Ushiwakamaru fucking dies to save everyone. This sucks for Benkei, because all units in Fate Go are basically historical and mythological figures summoned from beyond the grave and given a second life. And Benkei was historically Ushiwakamaru's retainer, so he hates himself because he was off fighting generic mooks while his lord died fighting a god. Not only that, in his shame, he reveals that he's not actually Benkei, but Hitachibo Kaisan, another one of Ushi's retainers who abandoned her right before her final fight. So he double hates himself because he feels like he repeated his greatest mistake. Benkei's absence from the story had a deep effect on the story's direction and his character. After this, he just leaves because, in his own words, he deserves to die in a ditch fighting demonic beasts. I could go on about how his absence and eventual return shaped the story, but I think you get the point. A story needs to be efficient in everything. And don't worry, I'll hold them off here is the absolute peak of sloppy writing. It's an arbitrary obstacle that removes agency. Characters are being shuffled out, not because there's something they need to or want to do, but because the story is done with them. That's why I hate the Chang-Li scene. She's just being put into timeout to keep her out of the climax. A small, compact, great story will always be better than an expansive, mediocre one. It's why people think Act 7 is better than the entirety of Launch. That's the biggest thing Wuthering Waves needs to fix in its story. It needs to be more efficient. Right now, things happen with a singular purpose when everything should be a multi-purpose tool. Let's go back to the Fraxidus. The setup for Act 7 is that they've captured Jue, this big dragon guy, and they're holding him on Hongzen. The story starts up and you arrive to the island, do a bit of stealth to avoid them, and then discover that the citizens of Hongzen have been forced into hiding by them. The story proceeds to do nothing with them until that moment with Chang-Li, and then they're just gone. What did they actually add to the story? Let's take that a step further. Isn't the story worse off because of them? Bear with me for a second. At the core of Jinsee's character and Act 7's story is Jue. Jinsee has decided to go against her all-powerful patron deity because she thinks it's mistaken in its plans for the future. So throughout Act 7, she's building up the confidence to confront it and convince it to change course. Now let's imagine an Act 7 without the Fraxidus, where instead of being kidnapped, Jue has chosen to lock itself up to prepare for the plan Jinsee disagrees with. Instead of putting the civilians in a cave just so the player will feel bad for them, this gives them a chance to be active characters. Maybe Jinsee has to convince them to trust her judgment over Jue's to get them to tell her where her dragon is. Do you get my point? The Fraxidus aren't here because the story is using them to do something. They're here because someone has to lock up Jue. Jue's status could have been something the story used to further the character drama, but it's hand-waved by the Fraxidus. The Fraxidus aren't here to be a part of the story, they're here so that others can. But they're still taking up a spot, wasting a role and using up screen time. And that's a lot of things in Wuthering Waves. Way too many things exist only to do one thing, only here to move the story and not be a part of it. I got a few more problems with the story, but Act 7 gives me confidence that they won't be repeated. The game's made huge leaps in quality, from freshening up lore dumps to overhauling their approach to character writing. It's gotten so much better. And not just the story, the launch soundtrack was mid and the optimization was ass. But Kuro's made it better, so I'm hopeful for the future. I think my complaints can and will get better. This game's future is looking good. I made this video because Kuro has shown they listen to feedback, so I'm here to explain what I think the story needs to work on. It needs to make an effort to write its locations more, and it needs to be more efficient in its use of plot elements. Let's put this into practice. Remember the first part of the video? The city writing chunk? doesn't really fit into my main point about being efficient, does it? It just kinda explained that Willard was bad at it and left it at that. Let's go a bit deeper. Why did Acts 1 through 4 turbo suck? Because they didn't matter. Nothing about Scar as a character, the epidemic, mangosteens, or anything they teach you matters to the stuff to do with the Thernodian, and only tangentially relates to Duet. It could matter later, but that won't be for months. Right now, the story's first half is almost inconsequential. None of the homework they give you matters. Let's go back to Babylonia. As a reminder, it shares the basic structure of WuWa's launch. A starting plot that's just stalling for shit to go sideways in the third act. Not Act 3, the nerd English shit, you know what I mean. Babylonia's starting plot revolves around Uruk facing the Three Goddess Alliance. It uses its exploration of Uruk life to show the balance between human and divine in their daily lives, which matters because the plot is exploring the idea of emancipation from the gods. So when Tiamat, the equivalent of the Thernodian, shows up as a surprise secret boss, it isn't just a raid boss jumpscare everyone has to come together to fight for a flashy action scene. It's a culmination of the ideas that have been set up. Tiamat is the primordial Earth Mother of Mesopotamia, so her importance to its people was already developed through exploring Ishtar and Ereshkigal, other goddesses of Mesopotamia. On top of that, Tiamat is the beast of regression, a demiurge trying to keep her children from leaving her. She's the final hurdle of humanity's battle for independence. Even if she wasn't physically in the plot until the climax, the story's been setting up everything she represents. She's an escalation of everything the plot is about. What do mangosteens have to do with the Thernodian? What does the Thernodian have to do with Duet? Do the Fraxidus even matter? Nothing feels like it fits together. The story is a series of poorly connected ideas. I don't know what'll matter in the long term or where the story is going because nothing feels like it matters, because nothing feels cohesive. The story has more problems than just this, but I think I'm done here. Fuck it. I lied. I'm gonna bitch more. Jinzu is way too clean around the edges. It's too idyllic and utopian to be interesting. Why the fuck does every patch end with a PowerPoint presentation on how things went after the climax? Where is the denouement? You can have your whack-ass presentation after you've gone over everything. Just properly wrap up things on screen. Don't tell me about how things went. Show me. And I know I made a big point of how the story needs to be more slimmed down and efficient, but they've got to start throwing in more characters. These smaller, tighter bundles are great, but this is a gacha game at the end of the day. A large cast is a strength of the genre, and by the nature of the story, characters are going to come back, as big climaxes are going to have a bigger population. Smaller, compact stories are only a band-aid to buy more time for the team to figure out how to write more complicated stories with more characters, since the world and cast are only going to get bigger. Alright. Sorry, I just needed to get that off my chest. Hey, Future Scan here. As you might have been able to tell, this video was supposed to come out before 1.2 did. It didn't, but hey, silver linings. I got to actually play the update, so I can say now that it's kinda disappointing. The optimization is just way worse. Like, the game runs horribly across the board, frame rates are lower, and seizure warning, this is what the game looks like if I try to record it. Aside from just, like, the way the game runs, the story sucked. Like, across the board, it was pretty bad aside from a few moments. Especially those side quests with Jeji at the end, that was terrible. Jesus Christ. I don't really have faith that it's gonna get better anymore. It's clearly being written by people who are amateur writers who only know how to come up with ideas for a story, and don't actually have experience turning that into a story that's fully fleshed out and functioning. I can make a video going over why I think that, and 1.2's problems as a whole, if people want that. That's not really a priority of mine right now. Right now I'm working on some more content. Around 5 videos are cooking right now. My main focus is this giant video essay that's gonna be longer than the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Look forward to that sometime. Anyways, if you also think that the story needs some work, which, let's just be honest, it really does, either share this video or talk about it on some forum, make your own video. The only way this is going to get better is if Kuro knows that they need to improve, so someone needs to get yapping. I don't have any kind of upload schedule because my main focus is that giant video essay I mentioned, so if you want to see more from me, subscribe. Anyways, I'm done here.